Welcome to City Club. The Great Resignation and the Great Awakening, what workers want and need today. Before we head into the program, I'd just like to say a word of recognition for our new Supreme Court Justice. A rare, wonderful day in history, I think. So, this is the 26th program this year. I'm Katie Piercy, City Club President. Support for the City Club comes from our members and sponsors. You can become a member also, and you should, by going go to our website, cityclubofeugene.org. This program is live streamed to our YouTube channel and archived there and on our Facebook page. Our podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Programs are broadcast on public radio station KLCC on Monday nights at 7 p.m. We have both business and in-kind sponsors. Our diamond sponsors are Kaiser Permanente, University of Oregon, Peace Health, and Lane Community College. And we get generous support from the City of Eugene and from Lane County. Our format today includes a question and answer period with City Club members and non-members alike via live stream and text. The texting number to submit your question will appear at the bottom of your screen during the intermission and the Q&A segments. Our speaker today is Sarita Gupta, Vice President, U.S. Programs, Ford Foundation, and 2122 U of O Wayne Morse Chair for Law and Politics. Biographical information on our speakers is available on our website, cityclubofeugene.org. I would like to thank Joel Korn for coordinating today's program. So, we've all seen the signs in the front of stores and shops. We're hiring, help wanted. How can so many jobs be open when nearly every employer seems to be offering better pay, benefits, and even signing bonuses? The government jobs report tells us what has happened. 20 million people quit their jobs in the second half of 2021. Some call it the big quit, others the Great Resignation. The most recent data shows people quitting every kind of job. What kind of impact will this have on business and labor? What is motivating so many workers to quit? Will they be satisfied with whatever new jobs they find? Will the Great Resignation help to revive the union movement and strengthen communities and families? How important are jobs anyway to overall well-being? With that question in mind, and many others, I'm going to turn it over to Joel to introduce our speaker.
This topic is very current and very important, not just economics. Many of the great publications in this country have commented on it. For March, the pandemic wrecked millions of careers. Here are 6 people that built new ones. That's from the New York Times. From the Atlantic, the myth that most Americans hate their job, April 1st. 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, Paul Krugman in the New York Times, whatever happened to the Great Resignation? And even such prestigious papers as the Register Guard have had articles about it. The Great Resignation is not so great. The Great Resignation, unquiet desperation. Our speaker today, Sarita Gupta, as you heard, is Vice President for U.S. Programs for the Ford Foundation and occupant of the Wayne Morse Chair. She is nationally recognized expert on economic, labor, and political issues affecting working people and is widely acknowledged as a key leader and strategist in the progressive movement. Sarita Gupta earned a BA from Mount Holyoke College with studies in women's health and society. Sarita?
Good afternoon. It's really great to be here with all of you, and thank you, Joel, for that wonderful introduction, and to the City Club for inviting me to be here today. It's been such a pleasure. I definitely lucked out with weather, I understand, here to be in Eugene, and I'm so excited to be serving as the chair of the Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics. Just by way of a little further introduction, I want to take a moment to talk about the Ford Foundation and just say that at the Ford Foundation, we believe in the inherent dignity of all people. Yet around the world, billions of people are excluded from full participation in the political, economic, and cultural systems that shape their lives. So we view this fundamental inequality as the defining challenge of our time, one that limits the potential of all people everywhere. Addressing inequality is the center of everything we do. And so for the past couple of years, I've led the Foundation's Future of Workers program. And yes, you heard me say future of workers versus future of work. And that's intentional because we believe that in conversations about the future of work, all too often we forget about the people who are actually doing the work that makes our economy function. Low and middle income workers who have experienced more than 40 years of stagnant or declining pay, shrinking benefits, and reduced power on the job. So the Future of Worker program is focused on ensuring that all workers, regardless of their classification, have equal rights to labor protections, that social protections are guaranteed to all, and that workers shape the policies and economic systems that affect their lives. We work to build public will and reimagine labor and social policies to make sure that all work and workers are valued and protected. When we think about the future of working people, we must understand that their future is inextricably linked to our ability to promote and preserve equality and democracy. I was especially drawn to working with the center given the theme of making work work, which is something I've been thinking a lot about over many years and I'm excited to share some thoughts on. So let me begin by saying that work is not working for far too many people. Before the pandemic and economic recession hit, there were 64 million people who earned less than $15 an hour and could barely make ends meet. They were living paycheck to paycheck, having to make impossible choices between paying for food, paying for rent, paying for medicine, and much more. Today, the pandemic and economic crisis has laid bare the results of decades of growing inequality and compounded it, taking a disproportionate toll on the poor, people of color, immigrants, people with disabilities, and others who were already marginalized before the crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the gross inadequacy of our existing social safety net and exposed inequities in access to basic needs for far too many people. As Dr. King once said, someday our nation will realize that the sanitation worker is as essential as the physician, because all labor has dignity. And in fact, through the pandemic, the public did take notice of essential workers. Essential workers including the factory and agricultural workers, delivery drivers and grocery store clerks, restaurant employees, first responders, and care providers who have always kept society running and only were recognized as such during the pandemic and in name only. These same working people do not have the basic protections or bargaining power in their companies and sectors to voice concerns about their working conditions. They want and deserve wages that would allow a decent standard of living, access to benefits, paid family medical leave, and health care. Too many have been forced to work without access to childcare, and in too many cases, left to work without safe, healthy working conditions. Even as frontline essential workers are hailed as heroes, they have and continue to be treated as expendable. Today, we're witnessing what many have termed as the Great Resignation. While some call this moment the Great Resignation, millions of workers feel that America quit on them a long time ago. For the last 4 decades, we've experienced what I would call the great stagnation of employers and policymakers not meeting the needs of workers. A recent Pew Research study reveals that the wealth gap between America's richest and poorer families more than doubled from 1989 to 2016. And that's not during a global health crisis. That's in so-called normal times. When the pandemic hit, the gap was electrified. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2020, the lowest wage workers lost 8 million jobs, while the highest wage workers gained nearly 1 million jobs. The Great Resignation is not about a great quit. This is a historic moment of refusal. People aren't quitting right now to leave the labor force. They're quitting to take other jobs. Jobs that will provide them with better wages, with benefits, and safe working conditions. In the last year, essential workers at all levels, from doctors to postal carriers, nurses to grocery clerks, farm workers to home care workers, have had to risk their own lives and the health of their loved ones to provide essential services for all of us. They've reflected on important questions. Is this job providing me with the adequate wages I need, access to benefits and economic security? But so have millions of other working people across the economy been asking these same questions. As a result, millions of workers are taking other jobs because of ongoing health and safety concerns and because of COVID-related care responsibilities. I want to dig into the care economy for a moment. Every person at various points in their life will need care. America is the only advanced economy without a universal infrastructure in place to support individuals and families in need of care. 70% of the US workforce earns less than $50,000 per year. Okay, so let's just hold that. 70% of the US workforce earns less than $50,000 per year, while annual child care costs start at anywhere from $10,000 to $16,000, and nursing homes cost anywhere from $80,000 to $100,000 a year. This directly impacts the quality of care that children, aging adults, and people with disabilities can access. Care is unaffordable for many people in this country. Care is also essential for a just economic recovery and how we make work work. At the height of the pandemic, we saw plain as day how the ramifications of a flimsy care infrastructure were felt sorely by workers, disproportionately more so for women and women of color. With schools and daycares closed, millions of families were left with impossible work-life demands that lower-income families have long suffered. Nearly 2.5 million women, and largely women of color, were forced to drop out of the workforce as a result. And the squeeze that workers are feeling will only get more acute, given an estimate from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that in the next 5 years, more than half the workforce will be caring for an aging adult. So workers are assessing and making decisions about their jobs. And this is coupled with policymakers trying to figure out how to build the economy back stronger, which means they're considering pathways to creating good jobs and more opportunities. And they're trying to address the broader set of needs that working people face when trying to re-enter or stay in the workforce. You know, like issues of childcare, for example, and paid leave, for example, and other care supports. But as we're experiencing and witnessing, policy debates are slow and in some cases stalled. And many workers can't afford to wait. And so they're acting with their feet at this moment. Growing numbers of workers are not leaving their jobs but choosing to take collective action to improve their working conditions. So at the same time as we see people leaving current jobs and trying to find better jobs, we are also seeing an increase in efforts to unionize that signals that workers are exercising collective power to demand better conditions for themselves and their fellow workers. Just last Friday, a week ago, Amazon workers won a union on Staten Island, where workers initially mobilized at the start of the pandemic on health and safety issues. They staged a walkout, and leaders of that movement were actually retaliated against and fired for taking action around health and safety conditions at the start of the pandemic. Well, this just continued to brew, and workers said, we need to keep organizing. And they really organized to address issues like health and safety, but also the need for longer lunch breaks. Because guess what? If you work in an Amazon warehouse, you may work on one side of the warehouse, and to get to the lunchroom, it could take you anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes to get there. And your lunch break is a total of 30 minutes. So then how are you supposed to get back in time, right? So longer lunch breaks, affordable health plans, higher wages. Now, Amazon has said, well, we pay $18.75 an hour. But anyone who knows New York City knows that that is impossible to live on, given the cost of living in that city. And they, of course, organized around the issue of the use of personal satellite navigation technology that tells them via an algorithm where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to get there, and how long it's supposed to take, which has actually resulted in workers being denied bathroom breaks and much more. I have actually met workers who tell me they wear adult diapers because they can't take a bathroom break. So that leaves you to wonder, why are workers organizing? Because they are so disrespected in the workplace. There's, of course, a whole other Amazon vote happening in Bessemer, Alabama, as we speak, and we haven't heard the results of that yet. Starbucks workers have gathered unprecedented momentum in unionizing efforts as well, following the flagship establishment of a union in Buffalo, New York. Branches across the country are taking up the union fight. As of today, 200 Starbucks locations have sought union elections. And as I know it, all of the branches in Eugene have announced union drives. But it's not only Amazon workers and Starbucks workers. Workers across the economy, tech workers, are mobilizing and taking action. And in fact, not long ago, 600 digital workers at the New York Times unionized. So last fall, in addition to all the unionizing, we should just also remember that in addition to new organizing, workers have also been on strikes, taking collective action. This last fall was named Striketober, because as of October 15th, over 100,000 workers were either on strike or preparing to strike in manufacturing, to filmmaking, to healthcare, and much more. So what I'm trying to tell you is it's not only low-wage workers who are mobilizing right now, it is actually workers across the economy. So what we're actually seeing is a type of great awakening. Workers are acting with their feet because, again, work is not working for far too many. So there's lots to tell about how we got here, and I do want to take a few minutes to say that before I talk about what are the implications. Work as we know it is changing. It is being profoundly reshaped by this global pandemic. But well before the pandemic, shifts in work have been driven by forces such as globalization, demographic changes, technology and innovation, and climate change. In terms of globalization, globalization has helped accelerate a shift in how work is structured. In many more advanced economies, the structure of work has shifted away from mega firms of the past, which employed and provided benefits for large workforces across a range of skills and income levels. So think General Motors, right? Big firms like that. work is shifting towards more nimble firms who keep a light footprint when it comes to employment, offering permanent jobs to a relatively small number of high-end managers and engineers and other office staff, while relying on a fluid army of contingent workers for everything else. So think Uber or Instacart or some of these companies. This trend towards fissuring, it's a term that was coined by an American academic, David Weil, is growing. Essentially, firms are constructing networks of subcontracting, outsourcing, and franchising that allow them to streamline operations and cut costs, specifically labor costs, by avoiding the responsibility once attached to the standard employment relationship of the past. Because remember, in the United States, in order to get health care benefits, it comes through your employment arrangement, right? So this is a model in which employers are actually socializing the risk, but privatizing the wealth that is created. So as a result of this trend, we see a rise in contingent work that is much more precarious and insecure. And we also see an increase in independent contractor classification, which matters in a legal context because according to US labor law, they are excluded from collective bargaining rights since they are not technically employees. This means millions of workers are excluded from basic labor standards. I mean, basic wage standards, basic standards. So in addition to that, we have demographic shifts. Expanding youth populations in some parts of the world and aging populations in others are creating new pressures on labor markets and social security systems. And then technology and innovation has been another trend. While artificial intelligence, automation, and robotics will eliminate jobs, I think some of you remember at the height of some of the future of work discussions, it was all about how robots were going to take over everybody's jobs. We know that is actually not what's going to happen, but we also know that there will be some jobs eliminated, and they're poised to create new jobs. So the question is whether or not those new jobs will be good quality jobs that provide people with what they need to live sustainable lives. And more broadly, across geographies and sectors and labor activities and classifications, technology is fundamentally reshaping work in ways that meet the needs of businesses and consumers alike without a lot of concern for workers' interests. And then finally, climate change. The greening of our economies as we adopt sustainable practices and clean technologies will also create enormous opportunity for new jobs. Again, will these jobs be good quality jobs? And as other jobs will disappear as a result of countries scaling back their carbon and resource-intensive industries, how do we create pathways for workers who will lose jobs and need to acquire new skills that match the jobs of today and tomorrow, right? So these forces are also exacerbated by broader trends that make our economy increasingly unequal, such as wealth concentration among the super rich, right? In the US, the top 1% holds more than the country's wealth than the bottom 90%. Or market concentration, including the heightened power of tech monopolies that contributes to wage stagnation. It limits entrepreneurship, increases the cost of living, and stifles innovation. And then, of course, the growing financialization of our economy, designed to maximize value for shareholders versus society at large. So consequently, work has become increasingly precarious, unsafe, and unsustainable for millions of people. So what does that mean for the everyday worker? It means wages have remained stagnant, or in some cases declining. I was shared in a class at the University of Oregon the other day that people at the 40th percentile of the income distribution, so think bank tellers or preschool teachers, saw their incomes grow by just 0.3% per year from 1980 to 2018, while those in the top 0.1% saw their already large incomes quadruple over that same time. And so just to further illustrate this point, 30% of domestic workers, so nannies, house cleaners, elder care providers, who make so much of work in America possible, were found to rely on public assistance for food security. 30% of them rely on public assistance for food security. And then on top of it, we have limited access to basic protections and benefits in our country where basic necessities such as health insurance and paid sick leave are tied to our work status. Too many workers lack access to those basics. So for instance, while 90% of professional workers have paid sick leave, only 27% of food service workers do. These are the people who are handling our food every day, right? And then, of course, we have outdated labor laws and protections. Labor laws have not kept pace with the changes in the nature of work and the workforce. So, for instance, gig workers who are said to make up somewhere between 25 to 35% of the pre-pandemic workforce, who are classified as contractors often, have prevented them from accessing basic benefits. This was actually a really large struggle around some of the immediate policies that were put in place when the economic crisis hit to figure out how to help families. There was a huge debate over how to manage independent contractors because they're left out of all of those access to those types of benefits. And a critical note on this point, not only are they lacking access to benefits and bargaining rights, as I talked about before, it's important to know they join a large swath of other workers who are excluded from basic labor protections and the right to organize and collectively bargain. And those are domestic workers and farm workers, agricultural workers, right? Because when the New Deal was negotiated, there was a compromise made. And so politicians in the South who represented the interests of a plantation economy had to compromise with Northern politicians, and the agreement was that domestic workers and agricultural workers would be excluded from any of the labor protections in this country. And we live with that legacy today. So those are workers who can't organize into unions. But then when there are workers who have the right to organize and can organize into unions, they find that the game is rigged against them. Pushes to unionize often fail because employers can deploy a range of extreme union busting tactics and even break the law with very little repercussions. There's virtually no penalties for an employer who violates the law. You don't lose your license to operate. You don't lose your ability to bid on a government contract. There's really no penalty. So what we find is workers who are organizing are subjected to captive audience meetings, to videos in their workplaces about why they should be anti-union. They're told that the company will shut down or the franchise will shut down, that they'll lose benefits, and for known organizers, there's the problem of retaliation. And going back to Amazon Labor Union, the lead organizer, Christian Smalls, was one of the people who was fired for organizing and raising health and safety standards in the first place. Yet, despite all of this, most Americans support unions. A recent Gallup poll shows that 62% of people surveyed have a favorable opinion of unions. So the last 40 years have been really difficult for working people. And so the moment that we're in now actually creates the opportunity for us to forge a very different path forward. So how do we make work work? So I do want to just share a few thoughts on this, then we can open it up for discussion. One is we absolutely need to update our laws, policies, and frankly, our beliefs to meet the needs of modern day workers. Second, we need to ensure that collective bargaining is expanded beyond workplaces to support a healthy political and economic multiracial democracy. And finally, it is so critical for us to center the fight against white supremacy and gender discrimination as central to the work that we do as we pave a new path forward. So just a word on each. In terms of updating laws and policies, workers are not waiting for the laws to change. We see wage boards forming around the country and standards boards forming around the country as examples of this. And actually, just to share an example from the Ford Foundation, we support the Always Essential campaign that brings together working people, activists, and organizations to transform what's possible for essential workers, especially those in low-wage sectors who are disproportionately Black and other people of color. The campaign works at every level, from cities to states to the federal level, to make workplace more democratic and fight for better pay and working conditions for essential workers. Well, they recently won a massive victory in New York City, where workers held a hunger strike because the state actually failed to provide relief money for undocumented people. The campaign generated national support and ultimately won, with the state allocating $2.1 billion to undocumented workers. In Harris County, Texas, we saw essential workers come together with their second victory, and they won a standards board coming together with the city and the county, actually, with the county and industry leaders to together develop health and safety standards in the county. So there's lots of innovation happening now. Whether the laws change or not, whether workers are included or excluded, workers are finding ways to make sure their voices are heard. One other example of innovation in the last 10 years has been the National Domestic Workers Alliance, who have advocated and won basic protections and benefits for house cleaners and care providers all over the country by running Bill of Rights, domestic workers' Bill of Rights campaigns, and creating standards boards. Actually, Seattle being one of the first cities where a domestic worker standard board was created, where domestic workers with the city and industry leaders came together to begin to negotiate on training and wages and other supports that were needed to make the system work. And so what's interesting is domestic workers who have absolutely no bargaining rights, have no labor protections under the law, not only have figured out how to achieve some standards, but they also have recently launched a first-of-its-kind pilot program to advance workers' interests on platforms. So NDWA Gig Workers Advocate was an organization launched by the domestic workers movement to improve quality of jobs for gig economy workers. Handy is an online marketplace for home cleaning, and they're the biggest online cleaning dispatcher. So the agreement is the first of its kind between an advocacy organization for workers and a gig economy company. And what they won was a $15 minimum base pay, substantive part-time off benefits way beyond the law, a contractual monthly process for handy pros, which is what the workers are called, and the company leaders to raise, discuss, and address problems workers are experiencing on the platform. And they were able to pilot this in 3 states, Florida, Indiana, and Kentucky, where frankly, they're difficult legislative terrains and where the labor movement has less political power. So my point is, victory is possible for many workers today, and that's what we're seeing. This win has ensured that 3,000 to 4,000 handy pro cleaners will benefit from higher wages and more. So all of this leads me to talk about the need to expand how we think about bargaining. We need to forge new ways of organizing and bargaining that are appropriate to a world in which power is concentrating in the hands of fewer economic actors. But we also have to understand that workers have a stake in their ability to not only come together collectively as employees, but also in the myriad of ways that working people play a role in the economy at large, as tenants, as debtors, as homeowners, as consumers. People need to be able to join together and negotiate with specific forces of capital, corporations, banks, elements of the state, to ensure dignified lives for themselves and their families. Therefore, we have to expand our definition of bargaining to be about creating pathways for more working people to come together collectively in this way. An expanded bargaining that ensures democratic practices are applied to all the ways that workers interact with the economy helps us to recognize that collective bargaining is a fundamental characteristic of democracy. As the late Madeleine Albright said, while democracy in the long run is the most stable form of government, in the short run, it is among the most fragile. And that can't be more true today than it is in the United States. So, for labor and other social movements, and all of us, we must tend to the fundamental work of revitalizing our democracy, because working people cannot improve their lives without gaining an effective collective voice in shaping the world on and off the job. Democracy is more than our political voice. That is very important, and there are so many attacks on our ability to vote right now. But it's more than that. It has to be about bargaining rights in the workplace as well. And as essayist Yoni Applebaum has argued, that Americans are going to have to get back into the habit of democracy. To me, this goes part and parcel with advancing collectivism as an acquired habit. It's not just that people aren't joining unions, they aren't joining PTAs, they're not joining churches, they're not joining associations, Rotaries, or other volunteer groups with democratically elected positions within their communities. And civic participation's demise also models political participation's demise. So all of that to say, in closing, nothing is inevitable in what this means for the livelihoods and overall well-being for people, for workers. Choices we make as a people and a nation and a sector will shape this moment and the experiences of workers in society for generations to come. We are facing many of those choices right now. We can decide that we're going to let others imagine a future that benefits a very small handful of people, or we can imagine and act on a future that benefits us all for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to take a 5-minute break and be back for questions and answers.
Great question. So here's the problem. We often think of work and well-being as separate. Yeah, I've talked to so many workers, actually a lot of older workers who will say to me, I remember a time when I worked to live a full life. I worked and I was able to make enough and get the benefits that I needed that I could be civically engaged. I could engage in the community. I could take care of myself. But today, I feel like all I do is live to work. We can't continue to think about work and well-being as two separate entities. Because actually that is part of the Great Awakening and it's part of the Great Resignation. Because older workers feel that way, but guess what? Young workers today are also rejecting the notion that work should be all they live for. So that's just like broadly speaking how I think about it. But work being the means by which people can live well. They can live dignified lives. And that means housing, having access to food, having access to the kinds of supports that they need to sustain themselves and their families.
Is it that the wages are too low or the number of hours worked too many?
It's both those things. For some, it's wages are too low. For some, it's that they don't actually have access to enough benefits. For some, it's they're working way too many hours. In fact, most people right now in America work more than one job. They work multiple jobs to make ends meet. We should not forget that. And that's why issues like unpredictable scheduling is so hard for people. If I don't know what my schedule from a grocery store will be and I'm expected to go work as a childcare provider over here, or I'm expected to go here and I have no control over my schedules or budget, how are people supposed to live? And similarly, actually during the break, I was having a conversation with Mary, right? And we were talking about, there's so many other dynamics that we don't talk about. We talk about wages, we talk about benefits, we talk about hours of work, but we don't talk about the cost of housing, the cost of transportation. For many workers, it is actually where they can get jobs to where they live. There's a distance. I have met workers who have had to, their transit to work has been over an hour and a half to 2 hours one way. That makes living a dignified life very difficult. We don't have the kinds of public transportation systems, affordable housing near jobs, where jobs are available. And so all of that adds up to the real challenges that workers are experiencing.
With respect to the Great Resignation, there are some articles that I alluded to that talked about some people are doing great. They love their new job. And some people are doing dreadful. There's buyer's remorse.
Yeah.
Can you comment about that are there any studies, first of all, as to the number of people who are happy with their change, the number of people who are just, dismayed at the choices that they made?
Yeah, I know that there have been a lot of announcements of studies being done. I can't point to any specific that have been completed at this point, but I do know this is something that many researchers are looking at right now to have a much better quantifiable data on. I will say the other unspoken issue between work and well-being, and what also has created tension for a lot of workers around the choices they made, is the lack of a care infrastructure. We can't keep pretending that it doesn't matter. It actually matters. I'm here today, thank God, because other people are caring for my daughter and other people are caring for my dad with Alzheimer's. I couldn't be here today if that wasn't happening. And so we really undervalue and under-recognize how critical the lack of a care infrastructure in this country is in terms of then the experiences that people have at work. And so we do have people who have transitioned to new jobs thinking that they could still make it, but recognizing that things like the lack of a care infrastructure are still impacting their jobs and their ability to enjoy what they're doing.
Let me just ask a follow-up. before Ruth's question. Are there other countries that have mastered the art of a care infrastructure?
I don't know that there is one country that would say they've mastered all of it, but what I will say is that the US is pretty far behind when you look globally. We're the only advanced economy that does not have a paid family medical leave policy. That is shameful. That is shameful. We don't recognize that people need family and medical leave. We don't have childcare. Other countries have figured out universal childcare supports. And one of the big issues globally that actually no country has figured out yet is the rapidly aging population and elder care. So that is what's actually very exciting, is that there are global alliances coming together. There's a Global Alliance for Care that's come together, where governments around the world are coming together with philanthropy, are coming together with civil society organizations to begin to model what good care policies can look like that benefit both the families and individuals, but also the workforce that is needed to, frankly, be retained in this workforce. Because in the US, let me tell you, care workers are so undervalued, underpaid. I have met many amazingly brilliant care workers who painfully left the sector to go work. I met this one woman who said, I'm now working at McDonald's because actually I get paid more at McDonald's than I do as a care provider. That is fundamentally something is wrong in our country that happens.
Thank you for your very fine presentation today.
Thank you.
It's really been exciting. I've always been for free education and free health care. Mm-hmm. And I think that can be a bottom support to have any occupation.
Yeah.
I know medical doctors we have a great shortage here in Eugene.
Yeah.
I have many friends who spent over 2 years and they can't find a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And then the doctors, I understand, they have over 1,000 patients each. That's too many to really serve the public. And it must change.
Yeah.
We must have free education and free health care.
Mm-hmm.
One doctor explained to me, well, it's hard to get doctors because when I finished, it was $500,000 in debt.
Yeah.
And another doctor chimed in and he said, right in front of me, he said, oh, mine was only $350,000 in debt.
Mm-hmm.
When you go in debt like that, and you know of other doctors that do, it cancels out your appeal of becoming a doctor.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we can possibly change. Do you think we'll make a change? Many have been working for free education and free health care, but we're still at a standstill. And every other country in the world, maybe when they come here for the great track meet, we can meet all these other countries and have them chime up on all their free education and their free health care.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll make a difference.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I'll just very quickly say that healthcare and education are really big issues in this country and continue to be really hot button issues and topics. And so, I think what we're seeing in addition to medical students is overall student debt is incredibly crazy in this country. And it's really forcing students to make really hard choices about whether or not they want to pursue education or pursue graduate level education. Right. So it's a big conundrum that we're in. But I guess all of this is wrapped up, these have always been issues, is that we have to understand that the moment is different today than when these systems were designed many, many moons ago. And that if we are actually going to say as a country that it's okay to have these nimble work arrangements and have more people who fall outside of traditional employment arrangements where they can get things like healthcare and they can get affordable education sometimes as benefits. Mm-hmm. If we're going to do away with that whole structure, then you have to create a whole other system that supports the bulk and majority of people in this country. And that's the conundrum we're in. That's what I meant by the choices we make today really matter moving forward.
Thank you.
So I'm looking at someone who's found the work that allows her to express her considerable gifts. And looking at your resume, I'm Mary Layton, I'm a member of City Club. I see that you have often had that kind of work. And yet when we talk about work, we're really talking about here in this conversation, jobs. So I wonder, have we given up on the notion that one's work in life might be in some way an expression of one's essence, one's gifts, one's bag of talents, and we're just going for work as a way you get insurance and money to buy your real life?
Yeah.
Or has that always been a thing, a privilege thing? I mean,
It's always been a privilege thing, and we should own that.
can we share the privilege more?
That would be lovely. But we should be real about that.
Okay.
There has been privilege in this country. I just talked about millions of workers. How is it possible that we are in 2022 and domestic workers and agricultural workers still do not have access to basic labor rights and collective bargaining rights in this country? That is a legacy of slavery. We have to own that.
Okay.
Right? There's all kinds of privilege that has existed. Some people have been allowed to think of work as their like life's purpose. But for far too many, that's not the privilege that they have. Now, that's not to say that people don't find meaning in their jobs and their work, and they find dignity in their work, right? No matter what it is. But this goes back to how do you balance that with what is the point of work in people's lives, which is what workers are asking themselves right now, right? Is the purpose that I live to work, or is the purpose that work is a way for me to live a full life?
Or
How do you bring
perhaps,
these together?
yes.
Exactly.
Scott Coltrane, City Club member. I wonder if you could comment on recent changes in how work is managed, particularly in office work and service work, that people have been Zooming, and perhaps
Yeah.
would that lessen their ability to kind of organize for more rights, or will it kind of give them more autonomy? What's your predictions?
Yeah, so you're talking about workers who've had the opportunity to do remote work.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, I think actually remote work, there's pros and cons to remote work and the experience that different workers have had. I've actually seen, especially among office workers and workers who can do remote work, because not all work can be done remotely, right? That they have figured out ways to build community and build camaraderie around these sets of issues. That's why it's important to recognize that the upsurge that we see of workers in motion aren't just in the low-wage sectors. They really are across the economy. So, and I think there's creative ways in which digital strategies are being used right now to organize workers. I mean, when you think about all the tech workers at Google who've been organizing and walking out and using their privileged voice in some cases to advocate for changes, whether it's surveillance policy to supporting low-wage service, workers in their companies, that's pretty promising. But it has been, I think we're just going to see more creativity on that front and opportunity for collective building.
Quick question, quick answer.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Mary Buxit-Schaefer. I'm the newest member of the City Club, and you stole my question, but I'm going to piggyback on it real quick. Really fast, can you talk about what companies can do to build community and camaraderie with remote workers?
Yeah, so one thing, first of all, I think companies have to be very cognizant, again, of who can do remote work and who cannot. And this matters a lot if we're going to address racial and gender inequities in our economy and work. Because more often than not, women and people of color are actually not able to access the same kind of remote work, or they need different kinds of arrangements in order for that to work. Okay. The second is, I think, being able to really bring workers in as stakeholders to design the ways to make remote work happen. And this is fundamentally it. It's like we keep acting like workers and employees are not a stakeholder in the success of a business.
Right.
It's actually in the interest of workers that a business is successful.
Yeah,
it's
we
their
need them more than they need
livelihoods.
us.
So how do we bring them into the conversation to design, to co-create what new practices and norms will support remote work arrangements?
Thank you. Sarita.
Sure, thank you.
Now Kitty Piercy, City Club President, will return to the podium.
Brilliant responses. So this has been our April 8th, 2022 program, What Workers Want and Need Today. Before we thank our speakers, I'll thank you again. I'd like to recognize our diamond sponsors. Kaiser Permanente exists to provide high-quality, affordable health care services and to improve the health of our members and the community. More information is available at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. Get more information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare partner for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy. Learn more at peacehealth.org. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. We are grateful for generous support for the City of Eugene and from Lane County. I would also like to acknowledge our Sapphire sponsor, Summit Bank. Support for the City Club comes from Summit Bank, your local community bank, an independent community bank headquartered in Eugene. Summit Bank serves businesses and professionals in Eugene, Springfield, and Central Oregon communities. For more information, visit sbko.bank. Today's gold sponsors are Home for Good and Emergency Veterinary Hospital. Thank you to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, PAC Info and Simplified Computing LLC, Dotson's Photography, and special thank you to public radio station KLCC FM 89.7 for airing City Club programs on Mondays at 7. Our programs are always available on our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and our podcast. We invite everyone, members and non-members, to participate in our programs in person at our new venue, the First United Methodist Church at 1376 Olive, or by live stream on our YouTube page. More information is on our website, cityclubofeugene.org. Next week, what's coming next week? We will welcome all 8 of the candidates running for the Democratic primary in Oregon's 4th Congressional District. Hot stuff, which will be left open by Congressman DeFazio's departure. If you plan on being at the taping, please be aware it will be a 2-hour conversation. Be prepared. More details and information about future programs can be found online at City Club's website, cityclubofeugene.org. And before I do my last thank you to Sarita, I'd just like to observe, when I first came to Eugene in the 70s, actually, we were all told, well, people just live here because they like it. They don't expect good wages. They just come because it's such a grand place to live. They will gladly give their earnings and their service because it's such a great city. Well, it is a great city, but everybody needs to live. So with that, I would like to thank Sarita Gupta for our great program. This concludes today's program. Let's give her a hand before I finish it. If you look outside, it's a sunny day. Should make you feel good. Go out and enjoy it.